Dust hung heavy in the air, stirred into lazy spirals by the hum of Margaret's sander as she stripped the plaster from her grandmother's old parlor wall. The house had been in her family for generations, its bones creaking with age, its silence carrying secrets. Margaret had never much cared for the place, but when her mother passed, she felt a stubborn pull to restore it rather than sell it off. That morning, the air smelled of mildew and history. She worked methodically, sweat clinging to her temples, when the tool caught against something hard beneath the plaster. The sound jarred her, the teeth of the sander sparking. She shut it off and scraped with her gloved fingers, prying at the stubborn patch until a small cavity revealed itself. Inside was something wedged deep, an object wrapped in cloth, brittle with dust and time. Her pulse quickened. She tugged it free and coughed as centuries of dust rose like a ghost. The bundle was small, surprisingly heavy. She sat on the floor, wiping grime away, and peeled back the rotted cloth. What emerged made her breath catch. A journal, bound in thick leather, cracked and warped by age, its cover scarred as though it had survived fire and storm. The faint outline of an insignia, military in design, was pressed into the leather, though worn to near invisibility. Margaret's hands shook as she traced it. This wasn't a child's diary or an old household ledger. It was a soldier's journal. She sat cross-legged on the floor, the house creaking around her as if shifting in anticipation. The first page nearly disintegrated in her grip, but the writing inside was intact, though faded. Bold strokes of ink, written in a hand both urgent and deliberate. The first entry was dated October 17, 1918. Nearly 100 years ago. The guns have quieted, but I know peace is not yet ours. There are whispers in the camp that orders are false, that men are sent to die for reasons not told. I feel eyes on me even as I write. I will keep this record hidden, for if they discover it, my life will be forfeit. Margaret's throat tightened. She flipped further, scanning words that bled with exhaustion and fear. They say the war ends soon, but I know better. The enemy is not across the sea, it is among us. Another line read, "What we uncovered in the tunnels was not meant to be seen. Not by us, not by anyone. And yet they would build on it, profit from it, bury us all if we speak." She pressed her palm to her lips, trembling. She had grown up hearing family legends of great uncles who served in the war, of neighbors' sons who never returned. But no one had spoken of this soldier. There was no name in the front cover, only an initial, E. And yet she felt a strange intimacy in the way the words reached out to her, raw across the gulf of time. The air in the room seemed heavier. She turned another page. October 20th, 1918. Tonight, Captain Hensley ordered us into the caves again. Said it was to destroy enemy stockpiles. But the crates bore no foreign marks. They bore the crest of our own city. They are moving something through the war, something they should not. God help us if anyone discovers what lies beneath this soil. Margaret exhaled sharply. A shiver traced her spine. Her city. The crest described matched the emblem carved above the courthouse downtown, the one every schoolchild had traced during history lessons. What could crates bearing that crest be doing in a war zone overseas a century ago? She snapped the book shut, her breath ragged. This wasn't just some relic. It was a voice preserved against all odds, whispering truths meant never to be known. The room felt smaller, oppressive. She could almost hear the soldier's labored breath in the silence. She placed the journal on the table, staring at it, feeling the weight of a century pressing against her chest. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, shattering the stillness. A text from her neighbor. "Everything all right over there? Thought I heard something." She typed back a quick reassurance, fingers clumsy, before setting the phone aside. She looked back at the journal, her heart still hammering. As she gathered her tools to leave the room, something slipped from the back of the book, fluttering to the floor. A folded piece of paper, yellowed, edges brittle. She hesitated before picking it up, her breath shallow. Unfolding it, she found a map, crudely sketched. Streets she recognized, her city, though drawn as it must have looked a century ago. At the corner of the courthouse was a bold X, circled again and again in thick black strokes. And scrawled across the bottom, "They will never find it. But if you do, burn it before they come." Margaret froze. Her mind raced. Who was they? What was hidden there? And how had this journal, buried in her grandmother's walls, found its way to her hands? as if waiting for her to be the one to open it. The house groaned in the storm outside, a low rumble like distant artillery fire. Margaret clutched the journal to her chest, the map trembling in her other hand. She told herself she could put it back, seal it in the wall, and pretend she had never seen it. But she knew, with a certainty that chilled her blood, that she was already too far in. The soldier's words had hooked her, and the map demanded action. She turned toward the window, rain streaking down the glass, and in that fractured reflection, she thought she saw movement across the street, a figure standing too still, watching her house. When she blinked, it was gone. The journal lay heavy in her grip. Her life, ordinary only an hour ago, no longer felt like her own. Somewhere beneath the soil of her city lay a secret buried for 100 years, a secret her family walls had protected until now. And someone else might already know she had uncovered it. Margaret didn't sleep that night. The storm rattled the windows and sent shadows crawling across her ceiling. But even when silence fell in the early hours, her body remained tense, her mind pacing in circles. She had left the journal on her nightstand, unable to put it back in the wall, unable even to leave it in the parlor. It felt alive, pulsing in the dark like a heart she had stolen from the grave. Every creak of the house seemed sharper, every rustle of wind like breath on her neck. By morning, her coffee sat cold, untouched, her eyes red-rimmed from staring too long at the same passages. The soldier's words clung to her. Conspiracy, betrayal, crates marked with her city's emblem. And that warning, burn it before they come. She told herself it was foolish to obsess. It was just an old journal. People wrote nonsense under the stress of war. But the map, that crude sketch of her city with its bold X, gnawed at her reason. What if there was something there? What if he hadn't been mad, but desperately trying to record the truth? And what if others had buried it precisely so it would never surface? By noon she couldn't resist. She tucked the journal into her bag, the map folded into her pocket, and walked downtown beneath a gray sky. The courthouse loomed ahead, its limestone facade streaked by age, its carved crest identical to the one the soldier had described. She had passed this building countless times without ever thinking of it as more than a relic of civic pride, but now every arch and column seemed to conceal a hidden purpose. She circled the block, tracing the lines of the map against the modern streets. The landmarks had shifted, stores gone, roads renamed, but the courthouse corner was unmistakable. That was where the X had been drawn. She paused, scanning the area. Lawyers hustled past, citizens entered with papers, guards stood watch at the steps. Nothing unusual, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. The same sensation from the night before, prickling between her shoulder blades. She glanced behind her, but saw only the flow of strangers. Perhaps she was unraveling. Still, she walked to the far corner of the courthouse and pressed her palm against the old stone. Cold, solid, harmless. But she noticed a plaque affixed to the wall, commemorating renovations from 1919, the year after the journal entry. Strange coincidence. Margaret's hand trembled as she traced the engraved date. What if the renovations had been more than cosmetic? What if they had been to hide whatever the soldier had feared? She leaned closer, whispering almost to herself. What did they bury here? Excuse me, miss, a voice startled her. A guard had approached, frowning. You looking for something? Margaret straightened too quickly, heart racing. Oh, no. Just, my grandfather worked construction here. I thought I'd see if his name was on the plaque. She forced a laugh, her throat dry. The guard looked at her another beat before nodding stiffly and walking away. She left quickly, pulse hammering. It was ridiculous, she told herself. She couldn't dig under a courthouse. She couldn't storm archives demanding answers. But she also couldn't go home and forget. She needed help, someone who could verify the journal, someone who might know if her city had skeletons rattling in its foundations. That night, she called Daniel, an old friend from college, now a historian at the local university. He specialized in wartime records. She hadn't spoken to him in years, not since a bitter argument ended their friendship, but desperation made her swallow pride. He agreed reluctantly to meet at a diner the next morning. When she slid the journal across the booth table, his eyes widened. He flipped carefully through the pages, his brows knitting deeper with each line. This handwriting, it's authentic. Early 20th century ink. And these references. Captain Hensley was real, stationed in France in 1918. But he looked up sharply. Where did you find this? In my grandmother's house. Hidden in the wall, Margaret whispered. Daniel, is any of this possible? Crates with the city's crest, tunnels, a conspiracy? Daniel hesitated, lowering his voice. There are rumors. Old stories passed around in archives, never confirmed. Some say the city council funded secret shipments during the war. Weapons, maybe. Others claim it was something worse. But no one ever had proof. If this journal is real... He stopped, eyes flicking to the window. You need to be careful. Margaret leaned in. Why? Because if someone went to this much trouble to hide it, they won't want it uncovered. People protect legacies, reputations, money, sometimes violently. Her stomach sank. She wanted to believe he was exaggerating, but his tone was deadly serious. She asked, Will you help me? Daniel closed the book gently, as if weighing its danger in his palms. Yes, but understand, once we start digging, there's no going back. If this soldier stumbled onto something powerful enough to bury for a century, we could be stirring it up again. Margaret nodded, fear and resolve battling in her chest. They arranged to meet at the archives that weekend, but when Margaret returned home, unease shadowed her steps. She set the journal on the kitchen counter, staring at its battered cover. That's when she noticed it, the window in her back door, smudged with a fresh handprint. Her blood turned cold. She hadn't touched that glass. She rushed to the door, flinging it open. The yard was empty, the street silent. Only the faint smell of cigarette smoke lingered on the breeze. She locked the door, pulled the blinds, and pressed her back against the wall, clutching the journal to her chest. Someone had been here. Someone new. Margaret's breath came ragged, her mind spinning. The soldier's words echoed, burn it before they come. She realized now the warning hadn't been paranoia, it had been prophecy. Margaret hardly slept again. Every sound of the old house felt like an intrusion, every flicker of shadow a warning. She had double-locked the doors, slid chairs beneath handles, even left the lights burning, yet the certainty of unseen eyes gnawed at her. By dawn she sat in the kitchen, clutching coffee she couldn't drink, staring at the journal as if it might answer. Someone had been there. Someone already knew she had it. When she met Daniel again that Saturday, the relief of seeing him was tempered by his anxious expression. He carried a satchel heavy with files, and when they slid into a corner booth of the diner, he set them down like contraband. I stayed up all night going through records, he whispered. Margaret, you won't believe this. She leaned closer, her heart quickening. After the war, there was a sudden, unexplained surge of construction downtown. Tunnels, foundations, sealed rooms. No public record of their purpose. Contractors were paid with funds routed through shell companies. And here, he spread out copies of faded blueprints, dated 1919. Beneath the courthouse, there's a sublevel that isn't on any current maps. Access sealed off within a year of completion. Margaret felt her throat tighten. The journal's scrawled map hadn't been nonsense. The soldier had been pointing to something hidden under the courthouse. She whispered, What were they hiding? Daniel shook his head. That's the question. Some suggest smuggled weapons. Others claim it was evidence of corruption. But one theory is darker, biological materials, experiments the government wanted buried. His eyes flicked to hers. If that's true, Margaret, this isn't just local history. It's dangerous knowledge. She sat back, her pulse hammering. Then why was the journal in my grandmother's wall? She was just a seamstress. Daniel hesitated, lowering his voice further. Maybe she wasn't just a seamstress. Maybe she knew. Maybe your family was involved, one way or another. The thought chilled Margaret to her marrow. Her grandmother, kind and gentle, humming hymns while she baked pies. Could she have carried a secret like this? Before Margaret could respond, the bell above the diner door chimed. A man in a gray coat entered, his face half hidden by a cap. He scanned the room with casual indifference, yet his gaze lingered a fraction too long on their booth. Margaret stiffened. Daniel noticed it too. Don't look, just act natural, he murmured. We're being watched. They closed the files quickly, Margaret sliding the journal back into her bag. Her hand trembled against the leather strap. The man ordered coffee but sat at the counter, his eyes reflected in the chrome of the napkin dispenser. Margaret could feel the weight of his attention. When they left, the man left too, following at a distance down the wet sidewalk. Margaret's pulse roared in her ears. Daniel whispered, Split up. He can't follow both of us. Meet me at the archives at 8 tonight. Before she could protest, he slipped into the crowd, leaving her exposed. Margaret quickened her pace, ducking down alleys, weaving through shoppers, heart hammering until she finally lost sight of the gray coat. She stumbled home, locking every door, pressing her back against the wood, shaking so badly she could barely breathe. That evening she nearly didn't go. Fear warred with curiosity, dread with duty. But when the church bells tolled 8, she forced herself out, the journal hidden under her coat. The archives were cavernous and dim, the scent of old paper thick as incense. Daniel was waiting in a secluded reading room, papers spread across the table. "You came," he said with relief. "I almost didn't," she admitted. "That man, he was following us." "I know, and I think I know why." He pushed a document toward her. "Margaret, your grandmother's maiden name was Harper, wasn't it?" Her chest tightened. "Yes, why?" "This letter, dated 1919, is addressed to a Catherine Harper. It discusses the ceiling of the courthouse sublevel and thanks her for her discretion." "Catherine Harper, your grandmother." Margaret's blood ran cold. She picked up the fragile page, her hands trembling. It was real. Her grandmother had been part of it. Not a bystander, not an innocent seamstress, but someone entrusted with silence. "Why would she hide the journal then?" she whispered. "Maybe she couldn't bear the secret," Daniel said softly. "Maybe she wanted the truth preserved, even if buried." Margaret shook her head, torn between horror and grief. The woman who had raised her mother, who had raised her, had been complicit in something dark, something dangerous. She stared at the journal, now heavier than stone. Daniel leaned forward. "We need to go beneath the courthouse. If the sublevel still exists, the answers are there. But once we do this, Margaret, we'll be trespassing. If anyone catches us, it won't be a slap on the wrist. And if someone is still protecting this secret, they won't hesitate to silence us." Margaret swallowed hard, hearing the soldier's desperate plea again. Burn it before they come. She should walk away. She should burn the journal, destroy the blueprints, and forget. But she couldn't. She needed to know what her grandmother had done, what this soldier had died trying to reveal. "I'll go," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. "But Daniel, if we find something, if it's as dangerous as you say, what then?" His eyes darkened. "Then we'll have to decide whether the truth is worth the cost." A noise echoed through the archives, footsteps where no one should be. Both froze. Margaret clutched the journal, Daniel gathered the papers, and together they blew out the lamp. In the silence, the steps grew nearer, slow, deliberate. Margaret's breath caught as a shadow passed across the frosted glass of the reading room door. Someone was here. Someone new. And they were not alone anymore. That night in the archives became the turning point Margaret would never forget. The sound of footsteps on the other side of the door was deliberate, too steady, the tread of someone who belonged there or who believed they did. She and Daniel barely breathed, crouched in the dark as the handle turned just slightly, enough for her to see the faint quiver of metal against the lock. Then silence. Whoever it was didn't enter. The steps receded into the long, echoing hall, fading into the distance, leaving behind a vacuum of fear. Margaret exhaled slowly, realizing how tightly she had been gripping the journal against her chest. Daniel's eyes shone in the darkness, wide and alert, and for a long time neither dared to move. When at last they left the archives, slipping out a side door into the midnight air, the weight of the decision already pressed upon them. The danger was real, the watchers closer than they feared. Margaret felt as though the past itself had risen to trap her. The following days unraveled quickly. Daniel became distant, answering calls only briefly, sometimes not at all. Margaret walked past the diner to find it closed early, blinds drawn. When she tried his apartment, no one answered, yet the faint glow of a lamp flickered inside. She knocked, whispered his name, but silence pressed back at her. Daniel was gone, or hiding. Fear turned to dread as she realized she was suddenly alone with the journal, with a truth too large to carry and too dangerous to share. Her nights grew unbearable. The sounds of her house groaning became sinister, as though someone pressed their ear to the wood. More than once she woke to the impression of someone standing outside her window, retreating into shadow when she gasped and flicked on the light. Margaret stopped sleeping altogether, instead sitting with the journal open, its scrawled words blurring into delirium. One entry she hadn't noticed before caught her attention. "If you read this, I may already be dead. They move silently. They erase witnesses. Trust no one, not even those who wear familiar faces. The handwriting was jagged, hurried, stained with what might have been water or blood. It read like a prophecy, and it was happening to her. She clutched the pages, trembling. A knock on her door sent her heart slamming into her ribs. She froze. No one ever knocked this late. The sound came again, sharper this time, insistent. Slowly she edged toward the door, pressing her ear against it. A man's voice called softly, "Margaret, it's Daniel. Please, let me in." Her breath caught. Relief nearly made her undo the locks, but then suspicion rooted her still. Daniel had vanished without word. Now he appeared at midnight, voice too calm, too measured. She whispered through the wood, "Where have you been?" Silence, then a sigh. "It's not safe to talk here. Please, just let me in." Something in the cadence struck her wrong. Daniel had always spoken quickly, words tripping over one another when he was anxious. This voice was deliberate, too controlled. Margaret backed away from the door, clutching the journal tighter. "Go away," she hissed, her voice breaking. A long pause followed. Then footsteps retreating, slow, deliberate, down her porch steps, into the night. She stood shaking, certain that whoever had come to her door was not Daniel, or at least not the Daniel she knew. The collapse was complete now. Her ally was gone, perhaps silenced, perhaps worse. The journal had become her only companion, its words both guide and curse. She turned again to the map, to the sketched tunnels beneath the courthouse, and in her exhaustion, a grim clarity formed. She would have to go alone. The thought terrified her, but there was no one left to trust. If she ran, she would be hunted. If she stayed, she would be suffocated by fear. The only path was forward, into the dark where answers waited. That evening she packed a lantern, rope, gloves, and the journal, forcing her trembling hands to be steady. She dressed in dark clothes and moved through the sleeping streets toward the courthouse, each step a defiance of her terror. The building loomed ahead, its columns pale in the moonlight, its locked doors barring entrance. She circled around, heart hammering, until she found the boarded service entrance Daniel's blueprints had marked. The boards had been pried once before, recently. Someone else had been here. She slipped inside, dust thick in her throat, darkness pressing against her lantern's dim glow. The air smelled of mold, stone, and something faintly metallic. She followed the crumbling stairs downward, deeper than she thought possible, into the hidden sublevel. The silence was crushing, broken only by her footsteps echoing off damp walls. Then she saw it. A massive steel door, rusted but intact, set into the foundation. On its surface someone had scratched words, barely legible, "Do not open." Buried for a reason. Margaret's stomach lurched. The soldier's warnings, her grandmother's silence, Daniel's disappearance, all led here. Her lantern quivered in her hand. She reached out, her fingertips brushing the cold steel, and in that instant she felt the full collapse of her world. Behind this door was either truth or damnation, and once she chose, there would be no turning back. Margaret stood frozen before the steel door, her lantern trembling in her grip as shadows leapt along the stone walls. Every instinct screamed to flee, to run back up those stairs and seal this darkness behind her, but the journal's words echoed through her mind like a drumbeat. Buried for a reason. Trust no one. Her pulse throbbed in her ears as she pressed her palm flat against the corroded metal, and a vibration shivered beneath her skin, as though the door itself breathed. She yanked her hand away, eyes darting to the journal cradled in her arm, flipping to the final pages written by the soldier. The entries grew frantic there, each line more unhinged than the last, but one scrawled sentence repeated again and again. If they unearth it, everything ends. She swallowed hard, the weight of those words pressing against her ribs. Behind her came the faintest scrape of stone against stone. She spun, lantern beams slicing through the shadows, revealing the narrow tunnel she had walked through, but now a silhouette blocked the way. A figure stepped forward, and her breath caught in her throat. It was Daniel, his face pale, gaunt, as though he had not slept in weeks, but his eyes shone with feverish intensity. "I told you not to come here," he whispered hoarsely, voice echoing off the walls. Relief and fury tangled in her chest, but before she could answer, he raised a trembling hand. Margaret, listen. You can't open it. That thing. They protected it, hid it for a reason. If you open it, you'll damn us both. His words rattled against everything she thought she knew. Then why were you searching too? She demanded, voice breaking, her fear finally erupting. Why leave me alone with the journal? Why vanish? Daniel shook his head, stepping closer, lanternless, his shadow warping across the stone. Because I was being followed. They wanted me to lead them here. I disappeared to protect you. His eyes flicked toward the door, and Margaret realized with a shiver that it was not just her who had found it. Others had been searching, others who now knew exactly where she stood. A sudden clang rang down the stairwell above, boots striking metal. Not one pair, but several. Margaret's stomach dropped. Whoever they were, they had arrived. Daniel grabbed her arm, dragging her toward the steel door. We don't have a choice, he hissed. It's safer behind the door than out here. She stared at him, horrified. You just said we shouldn't open it. His grip tightened. And if we don't, they'll kill us. Pick your death, Margaret. At least behind the door we might survive. Voices echoed now, rough and commanding, closing in. Margaret's heart pounded. She dropped her lantern to the floor, fumbling with the rusted wheel on the steel door, her hands slick with sweat. Daniel shoved against it, and with a groan of ancient hinges, it shifted, releasing a gust of stale air so heavy and rancid it nearly knocked her to her knees. Together they wrenched it open just as beams of flashlights pierced the tunnel behind them. Margaret ducked inside, Daniel slamming the door shut. Darkness engulfed them, suffocating, until she relit her lantern, revealing what lay within. The chamber was vast, walls lined with shelves stacked with crates, documents, relics covered in dust. In the center stood a table, and upon it a chest bound in iron. The journal's words screamed in her mind. If they unearth it, everything ends. Daniel staggered forward, his face illuminated by the lantern glow, awe and terror mixing in his expression. It's real, he whispered. God help us, it's real. Margaret felt the collapse of her world tightening around her throat. She set the journal on the table, flipping to the last page again, her eyes racing across the words until she found what she had missed before. Seal it. Burn it. Die if you must, but never let them open the chest. A pounding began on the other side of the steel door. Whoever had followed was trying to break in. Margaret and Daniel locked eyes, their breath shallow. We can't let them have it, she whispered, voice shaking. Daniel's jaw clenched, sweat rolling down his temple. Then we destroy it now. He reached for the chest, hands grasping the iron clasps, but Margaret lunged forward, yanking him back. What if destroying it releases what they hid? What if opening it is the very thing that damns us? Daniel stared at her, torn, desperate. The pounding grew louder, metal shrieking under force. Dust rained from the ceiling. They had seconds, maybe less. Margaret raised the lantern higher, the flame quivering, shadows writhing along the chamber walls. She saw the fear in Daniel's eyes, the uncertainty mirrored in her own. The choice lay before her. Open the chest, destroy it, or flee with the journal and try to bury it deeper. None of the paths promised survival. Each one demanded sacrifice. Daniel's voice cracked, urgent. Margaret, decide. Now. The steel door screeched, bending inward as light slashed through the cracks. Margaret's pulse thundered, her hand hovering over the chest. She knew in her bones that whatever she chose in that moment would not just determine her fate, but the fate of everyone who ever walked these streets, the city, maybe more. And with the roar of the intruders breaking through, Margaret made her choice. The moment Margaret's hand struck the chest, the chamber erupted in chaos. The steel door tore open behind them with a shriek, armed figures flooding into the darkness, flashlights blinding her as shouts filled the stale air. But none of it mattered now. The chest's iron clasps groaned, buckled, and snapped as though pulled by unseen hands. The lid creaked open an inch, and from that narrow gap seeped a wave of air so cold it extinguished her lantern instantly, plunging them into a suffocating void. Someone screamed. A gun fired. The echo cracked like thunder, but the sound was swallowed by something deeper, an inhuman roar that reverberated through stone and marrow alike. Margaret stumbled backward, clutching the journal to her chest, her only anchor in the black. Daniel's hand found her arm, his grip iron tight, but his voice shook when he whispered, "What have you done?" The chamber lit suddenly, not from lanterns or flashlights, but from a pale, unnatural glow that poured from the chest itself. Its lid yawned open, and inside writhed nothing that should exist. Shapes of smoke and bone, faces stretching and collapsing into void, whispers clawing into her mind with words she could not understand, yet felt compelled to obey. The intruders froze, weapons raised but useless, their bravado shattering as the glow washed over them. One man dropped his rifle, falling to his knees, clutching his head and shrieking until his voice was no more than a gurgle. Another bolted for the door, but the tunnel beyond had vanished, stone sealed where the entrance had once been. Margaret knew then they were trapped. She turned back to the journal, fumbling through the final pages, her fingers frantic. The soldier's words blurred in the flickering light until one phrase leapt out, carved by desperation across the margins. To shut it, one must take its place. Her stomach heaved. Her hands shook so violently, she almost dropped the book. Daniel leaned over her shoulder, reading, and she felt the moment he understood. His breath caught, his body tensed. "It means a life," he said hoarsely. "A life to bind it closed again." Margaret's throat burned. Around them the chamber dissolved into chaos. The intruders firing aimlessly at the glow, bullets swallowed by the air itself. Men pulled screaming into the chest, their bodies unraveling into mist. She staggered back, pressing her spine against the stone wall, journal clutched to her chest. Her mind reeled. A sacrifice, hers or his, or let the chest consume them all. Daniel turned to her, eyes hollow yet resolute. "It should be me," he said, voice steady now. "You wouldn't even be here if not for me. I led you into this. My debt, my price." He stepped toward the chest, its glow painting his face ghostly pale. Margaret lunged forward, grabbing his arm with every ounce of strength she had. "No. You think this absolves you? That dying fixes everything? You'll damn me to live with it. And that's worse than death." Tears blurred her vision. The chamber shook, cracks splitting across the floor as dust and rock rained from the ceiling. The chest pulsed like a beating heart, each throb louder, closer, demanding. Margaret knew time was bleeding out. She stared at Daniel, at the man who had been her companion and her betrayer, her only ally in this nightmare. His eyes searched hers, desperate, begging for permission to end it. And she realized then there was no choice that did not break her. She pushed him back, stepping toward the chest herself, journal pressed against her chest like a shield. "If it needs a life, it will have mine," she whispered, though her voice cracked beneath the weight of terror. Daniel grabbed her again, dragging her back, their bodies colliding in violent desperation. "No," he shouted, his voice ragged with anguish. "Not you. Not like this." The glow surged, enveloping them both, and in that final moment, Margaret made her decision. She shoved the journal into his hands, locking eyes with him one last time. "Tell them," she gasped. "Tell them the truth." And before he could stop her, she wrenched free and hurled herself toward the chest. The glow swallowed her whole. Silence fell. The chest slammed shut with a sound like the crack of a world splitting in two. The light died. The chamber plunged into darkness once more. Daniel collapsed to the ground, gasping, clutching the journal so tightly his knuckles bled. Around him lay only silence. No intruders, no whispers, nothing but the faint echo of Margaret's final cry. The steel door creaked, reopening as though nothing had ever barred it. Trembling, broken, Daniel stumbled toward it, lantern in one hand, journal in the other. When he emerged into the night, dawn was breaking, pale light washing the ruins of the forgotten fortress. He turned back once, half expecting to see her, but only shadows lingered. He looked down at the journal, its cover warm beneath his palm, and realized with dread that new words had been written there, words in Margaret's hand. "I took their place. Keep it sealed." His chest caved with a sob. He staggered away, knowing he carried both her sacrifice and the soldier's warning. But the final page whispered an even darker truth. Every seal breaks in time.